Hello, please like and subscribe. Now, the British media is the second most privileged at the national level industry in the country after medicine. It's supposed to be a pillar of democracy, but I think many would argue it's a pillar of the establishment. The one thing they don't like, and I speak as someone who's been in the British media for a very long time now, don't like privilege being mentioned when it comes to them. Now, I'm joined by who I can only describe as the piss boiler in chief, Mick Wright, who does a very brilliant blog, which I will, here we go, brokenbottleboy.substack.com, which keeps a watchful eye on the British media in ways that many people in the British media do not like. And the reason he's particularly the piss boiler in chief at the current moment is he's done this map, which he will not be able to watch properly. I will put this in the description of the video and the podcast because it's just so big. And it is basically, it's the Nepo baby map of the British media. It shows like a load of journalists and who their famous parents / often including grandparents, brothers, siblings, sisters, you name it. And it's a network basically of just how incestuous the British media is. Hello, Mick.
Hello, how's it going?
Why did you do it?
Well, I did it because New York Magazine in December last year did a thing about Hollywood Nepo babies, which then usually quite often with the British media, what you'll have is follow-on pieces from stuff. So there were loads of pieces in the British media about the New York Magazine Nepo babies piece, and all those pieces focused on either the entertainment industry or lawyers or politics or some bits of corporate life, but never mentioned journalism. So the Times did a big article about it, not a mention of journalists. You go into the comments under there and the readers are going, well, hang on, what about Giles Corran? And what about Victoria Corran Mitchell, who got her start writing a column in the Times when she was like 15? Like what about these things? And it was just clear to me, well, these aren't going to get mentioned. Even when Vice did an article about Nepo babies, it covered entertainment Nepo babies in the UK, but nothing about journalism. And the reason is pretty clear. I mean, I used to work in the more mainstream part of the British media, and when I worked there, there's no way I'd have been able to write about nepotism within it in the way I have done, because as someone made a point after I put this map out, oh well, you never work in journalism again. It was a massive omerta type thing, like how dare you do that? And of course I know, you know, in the past when you've mentioned it, you just got a pile of abuse on you because people just don't like to talk about it, and it isn't talked about. So that's why I did it.
I mean, I should say, I can't go into too much detail, but they've repeatedly tried to have me fired over it, Nick. Yeah, pointing out the privileged nature of the British media, all the kind of vast amounts of racism churned out by the British media industry. Yeah. They don't like it up them, is all I'm saying, and they will try and
I can't be fired because I've burnt all the bridges already, so there's no more bridges to burn.
I just live on a burning bridge instead. So, Mick, why does it matter?
Well, I think it matters because people don't actually know about this. People sort of make an assumption that they kind of know a bit about it. But part of the response from this is so many people who might patronizingly be called civilians by people who were within the media don't actually know the extent of this. You know, there are a lot of people who do things like conceal who their parents are by changing their name or by just never talking about it. And it matters because I'm not saying that everyone on this map is, none of them are talented or none of them are capable, none of them could have been journalists without the influence of their parents or their uncles or great-grandparents or grandparents. But what I am saying is that it has an effect on who can get into the industry if there are so many people whose families have that effect. You know, I was talking to someone earlier who was told, oh, this person was nearly fired, but their family member is so important they can't be fired. That person's still working in the British media, you know, in a prominent position. They should have been fired, but they weren't because their influence is too strong. So it matters because this is an underlying structure going on in the media, and the media matters more than other industries because it has an outsized effect on the way society works and the conversations we have and what voices are listened to. That's why it matters. And it's so interesting as well to see people in our industry who haven't benefited from it still leaping in front to defend people who have benefited from it.
I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, as you said, I've raised this. I remember back in 2018 when I went through how privileged the British media is. And at the time, for example, 7% of the British population were privately educated. According to the Sutton Trust in 2016, 51% of Britain's top journalists are privately educated. It's got worse since then, actually. But the other point is, when you talk about, I mean, this incestuous nature, so, for example, the rise of unpaid internships often means, and this has been talked about a bit, to be fair, just generally, if you live off the bank of mum and dad, you can do an unpaid internship, which gets you a foot in the door of an industry like the media. Same in fashion, etc. But also, those unpaid internships are often exploited in a nepotistic way. So journalists in the national media will basically get their kids, their nephews, their nieces, like a relative in through an unpaid internship, and that is their gateway into the world of the media.
Yeah, and they're in through that, and then very quickly they move to being into a paid position there. You know, and I think that the point about there being too many people from who are privately educated in the media is a really good one. I was privately educated. I went to Thetford Grammar School, but once when I went to university, I went to Cambridge. After I finished there, my parents did not have money to support me in an internship or anything like that. So I went and worked on a trade magazine called Pensions World, who had, you know, so that was interesting as well. My route in was not, I get to do an internship, because I couldn't afford to. So I always want to mention that, because yesterday, the grandson of Roald Dahl, who is married into the Jordanian royal family, sort of threw that out as he thought it was a gotcha for me. Like, well, you went to private school, and say, A, I've never said I didn't. I think it's important not to hide it. But B, you know, my grandparent wasn't a famous writer. I don't have any family connections. The point I was making was about family connections in the media. So it was a very interesting sort of smear type tactic being used there by, you know, the literal grandson of a very famous person who's part of a Middle Eastern royal family now.
I mean, one of the things that really matters, it strikes me, is you get groupthink. Basically, you get lots of people from quite similar backgrounds, including those who've partly inherited their positions, let's be honest with you, as in they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for their family connections, unless these are social Darwinists who think that actually the best, like for pure-blooded, are rising to the top, that it's somehow in their DNA. And yeah, I mean, in which case it's gone a little bit dark is all I'd say. So deep down, they know they're there because of family connections to a large degree, and other people would be taking their place if it wasn't for that. They know that. Doesn't mean they're not talented in some cases, some more than others, I would argue. But you get basically this group thing, because if you get people from similar backgrounds who reinforce each other, because, you know, we look at the world, don't we, partly through the prism formed by our experiences. And if you're from similar backgrounds and you've had similar experiences, you won't necessarily understand what it's like to be stuck on a council housing waiting list, or to, you know, to suffer, you know, the impact of rising energy bills, or to be a private renter. That's a big crisis. It's very rarely mentioned probably in the media. I mean, that's the issue, isn't it? What issues are prioritized and what aren't, and how politics also is seen, or how politics is talked about, is through the lens of a groupthink where people mutually reinforce how they each see the world.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely that. And when you talk using housing as an example, you know, we have a huge landlordism is like an absolute scourge in the UK. And there's a general sort of tendency to treat being a landlord as a totally cool and fine thing amongst the media class, because lots of their families are landlords. I mean, of course, it's a problem in Parliament as well, with, you know, private landlords on the front benches of both parties. But that's an issue. The other thing I think that happens, and what's interesting when I look at people I know, you know, ex-colleagues who've come at me over this, is that even people who have not benefited from this, once they're inside and they're friends with people who have benefited from it, they will not criticize it. You know, there's a real kind of sense of you know, media class solidarity. It's the one class solidarity that seems to be consistent in Britain these days.
I mean, you made me laugh, I have to say, when you wrote in your blog, which everyone should check out, obviously, in support. As you'd expect, this is your map. As you'd expect, it's been received by Britain's rhino-skinned journal source with a quiet dignity for which they are renowned. I found it interesting when I brought up just the basic facts of how privileged the British media is, just objectively using statistics. It was they acted, a lot of people, as though I'd gone up to each of their mothers and told their mothers to go F themselves. That they were like, oh my God, and they were angry and abusive, and obviously made lots of complaints to my newspaper in an attempt to intimidate and threaten me, basically. That's what they did. But it's interesting because the British media on a daily basis throws all sorts of venom on vulnerable and voiceless people. Migrants, refugees, at the moment, trans people, historically gay people, black people. I mean, they've just gone through a long, long list. That's truth to power for them in many cases. But if you get, I mean, and what, you know, another really good example, Giles Corrin, who is one of these nepo babies you talked about, a year ago, he ridiculed someone I knew well, Dawn Foster, former colleague of mine at The Guardian, who died at the age of 33, 34. And he went on and just ridiculed about going to hell and laughed at her dying. And almost nobody spoke out. But if you speak out against the British media and how privileged it is, they will go ape. What does that tell us? Yeah,
I mean, Dawn was a friend of mine too. Last time I saw her in person was at the funeral of my other friend, Lyra McKee, so another working class journalist.
I met her, yeah, a wonderful woman.
You know, yeah. She was an incredible woman, and that is another issue for me because I a lot of times when I do this stuff, I do the writing, I do think of Lyra, and I do think of Dawn, and I've written about Dawn quite often because they should have been a lot bigger in the industry than they were, because this is an industry where people like Giles Corrin can steal a living. Giles Corrin would not be in his job if he were not, if he hadn't been the son of Alan Corrin. By the way, Alan Corrin, not a person who came from privilege. Alan Corrin, a person who became a very famous writer and humorist and journalist because he was just very good at writing jokes and columns, and that's justified. And the point for me with someone like Giles Corrin is he has been in the Last Chance saloon so many times. What he said about Dawn was horrendous, but before that he'd written on Twitter that he would like to kill and sexually assault a neighbor's child for playing the drums. He's written racist columns that are still on the Times website, and every week he's on Times Radio and people like Stig Abel, they're chuckling away at him. Stuff is a problem. It shows real contempt for everyone else, for the readers, for the audiences, because these people don't care.
Yeah, Giles Corrin actually, I'm not going to get out the violin here, but once he wrote, my prediction for next year is Owen Jones getting a peerage and Corbyn's resignation honours and becoming a fat old lord, getting smashed on Madeira in the morning and chasing young researchers with tight bottoms up and down the corridors all afternoon. I was told repeatedly that wasn't actually homophobic, and then Giles Corrin played the victim by claiming that my followers had turned up at his house and started haranguing his wife. I don't actually think that ever happened myself, but there we go. Just finally, Mick, will things, do you think, ever change? Because a lot of this, I mean, I feel sometimes like a kind of a glitch. Because a lot of my colleagues hate me. I mean, just be honest, I'm not revealing anything. They hate me. And there are very, very few dissident voices in the mainstream media. You're someone who's been told, essentially, you're a very talented writer and all the rest of it. You've been told you've got no future in the British media. But there are so many people, talented people out there, working class people, people of colour, who just don't have connections, don't have privilege. And a lot of people will look at this and think, well, why should I bother? This is rigged against me from day one. Nothing will ever change.
Yeah, I can understand that feeling. I think it's changing slightly because it's taking a long time, and it will take a lot longer than people predict. But the media as it exists now is falling apart over time. It is falling apart. It cannot continue to exist as the way it does. The finances don't work. The structures don't work. The traditional columnist model won't work for much longer. And there are loads of great examples of outlets who are doing different things. Who I think of people. First person thing that comes to mind is something like Galdem. There was they've just been in a report about them being regulated by Impress and trying to do a different work in a different way. So there are tons of outlets, and I could name tons of others as well, who are bringing new journalists in who are doing amazing things. Navarra, exactly. There are loads of things that are out there, are doing different models, finding different ways. I think it was interesting today that the Press Gazette was in its newsletter was kind of being very sneery about Substack. Another thing that they don't like, because they see these new models coming up, or different ways of making money and producing things. Before I had a Substack, it was very hard for me to do independent journalism writing, and now it's slightly getting better. I'm not earning huge money, but I'm earning some money from doing something for an audience that wants what I'm producing. Of course, that's described as fringe views by the Press Gazette, though. So, you know, take that for what you will.
Unlike whipping up bigotry and hatred against Muslims, refugees, and migrants, that's
yeah. Melanie Phillips is not a purveyor of fringe views, apparently, or neither is Rod Liddle. You know, a man who wrote in a national publication that he couldn't be a teacher because he would have sex with pupils. So
yeah,
there you go.
Respectable mainstream publications.
Highly unfringe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, better to be on the fringe than stuck with those awful people. Mick, it's been an absolute honor. Do please, everyone, do support Mick's brilliant Substack, Conquest of the Useless there. brokenbottle.com, brokenbottle.com.substack.com. That wasn't hard. I'll let you go, Mick, because that piss is not going to boil itself. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see you all soon. Cheers, Mick.